We've taken trade missions to various places. I just want to mention briefly our trade mission to China in 2008, November of 2008. We went there. There were about 30 Aboriginal businesses in our group, and we went there with 5 premiers. When we got to China, premiers are a big deal here, but in China they weren't any deal at all. Chinese see governors and premiers from everywhere in the world, and who they were really interested in is they were interested in the Aboriginal people. And it was very odd, because I just never would have expected that. And they were interested in us from a variety of points of view. They were, of course, interested in the resources that we potentially represent, but they were more interested in Aboriginal people from a cultural point of view. And it really surprised me, and it showed me the value of culture. We ended up being invited by the Minister of Foreign Relations to the Diotai State Guest House, which is this very special place where they invite elite world leaders in Beijing. And we were invited to meet with the top government and top business leaders in China. And we were in the funny position of having premiers and their ministers asking if they could come to our meeting. And at our dinner, after I'd made a presentation, the Minister of Foreign Relations was just about jumping out of his seat to talk to me through the interpreter. And what he said was that we can do business with anybody in the world. And he said, and we do, but if you bring your culture with you and you respect our culture, he said, we really love that. And next day we signed an MOU with his organization, which led to them financing, to some extent, one of the billion-dollar funds. And so, to me, there was a valuable lesson in that, because in the Western system, the West tries to distill everything down into a McWorld type of cultural view, where culture has no value, and you're just there to do the business, and that's that. But Chinese aren't that way. Chinese are very much like Aboriginal people in that they are interested in long-term relationships, and they're very, very interested in our culture, whatever it happens to be. We were speaking at huge conferences there, and the funny thing about it is that whenever our Aboriginal delegation got up and we spoke, the Chinese paparazzi just jumped up from everywhere, and to the point where the people organizing the conferences were saying things like, geez, you guys must feel like rock stars, which was, it was just a very unusual thing that happened. And it showed me an advantage that we could bring in doing business in other areas that appreciated our culture. But to get back to my book, when I was trying to figure out as a little boy how we got into this situation, how was it that we came to this situation, and in thinking about this book, I thought if we went back a couple of hundred years, we've been in a situation of dependency for a while. So I just looked at my own tribe and other tribes throughout North America, and I said, well, why not go back 10,000 years, because my tribe had been living for at least 10,000 years in the same place. And most tribes can say the same thing. And I told a story of the 10,000-year canoe journey, and I said, let's just assume that tribes and Aboriginal societies have been sailing through time and space for 10,000 years in this metaphorical canoe. And the question that I asked was, why is it It's only been in the last 300 to 400 years we've had so many problems. What did our ancestors do in that time when there was no transfer payments or no welfare? How did they survive? And they didn't just survive, they flourished. You know, to see the cultural traditions and the beautiful art and the complex social systems of the Aboriginal communities across North America, they're incredible. In BC, where I come from, there's 32 completely different languages. Languages so different that they're like German and Japanese. People couldn't speak to each other. In order to trade, we had to develop a trade language, which was called the Chinook jargon. So my purpose in telling the 10,000-year canoe journey story was to look at the kinds of characteristics that enabled our ancestors to survive for so long. They obviously were self-reliant. They were economically self-sufficient. But one of the hallmarks of any Aboriginal group anywhere in the world, whether you're on the African continent or North America, the hallmarks of any tribal society is the great level of interdependence and cooperation that we had. How we supported each other and worked together so closely. How important that was, and it probably was important because if your next meal depends on you working closely with your tribal members, over a long period of time, you develop skills and a mindset for working together, which I call in Dances with Dependency cultural synchronicity. And the moment you introduce an artificial form of sustenance like welfare and transfer payments, in the stroke of a pen, you wipe all of this out because people aren't reliant on each other anymore. When I was a kid and my grandmother needed a house and there wasn't any government housing, her tribal members just got together and built her a house. They milled the wood and they built her house. Nobody asked any questions. It was done very short order. And the understanding was, from our family, whenever any of those other elders needed a house, we would go and we would help them build their houses. We looked after each other. And you think about the early statistic I gave about our kids in child welfare care. Well, what happened back then? We just did Indian adoptions, and a family member, extended family member, just looked after our own kids. It's really important to understand this, I think, because we have to start working together. And what has been introduced through this Indian Act system was a system for dividing and simply conquering us, which was very effective. As part of the British method of colonization that was inherited by both the Canadian and American governments, is they understood very clearly the way to control people is to make them dependent. And so one of the principles I've elucidated in my next book about dependency, and it's fundamental, is the more dependent you are on anyone or any entity for your survival, the less control you have over your destiny. The more dependent you are, the less control you have.